Middle Land, Middle Way. A Pilgrim's Guide to the Buddha's India. Banti S. Dhammika. First edition 1992. Second revised edition 1999. Third revised edition 2008. Fourth revised edition 2018. Copyright Shrivasti Dhammika 1992, 1999, 2008, 2018. First Indian edition published by. Contents. A note on names. Introduction. Pilgrims. Art and architecture. Lumbini. Kapilavatthu. Bodh Gaya. Sarnath. Gaya. Rajagaha. Nalanda. Patna. Kampa. Vaisali. Kesaria. Kosumbi. Madura. Gurpa. Loria Nandangar. Barabar, Nagarjuni and Quaddle Hills. Savatthi. Kusinara. Don. Hints for pilgrims. Abbreviations. Notes. A note on names. In India, a single place may be known by several different names, and there may be a variety of ways of spelling a single name. Varanasi, for example, is sometimes spelled Baranasi and is also known as Banaras, while the people who live there often call it Kasi. Throughout this book, I have tried to be practical about place names. Where a modern name is similar to the ancient one, I have used the Pali spelling. In some cases, a place name has changed completely, but a Sanskritization of the ancient name is coming into use again. Thus, Bisarth is now usually called Vaisali and here is spelled Visali. In a few cases, a contemporary name is so well known that to use the ancient name would only cause confusion, and therefore I have retained the former. To avoid giving this book the look of a scholarly treatise, I have not used Pali diacritics for proper names or technical terms and phrases. For the transliteration of Chinese names, I have used the Wade-Giles system instead of the new Hanyu Pinyin system. In accordance with recent changes, I have used Kolkata and Mumbai instead of Calcutta and Bombay. Introduction. Ananda, there are 4 places the sight of which will arouse strong emotion in those with faith. Which 4 places? Here the Tathagata was born, this is the first. Here the Tathagata attained enlightenment, this is the second. Here the Tathagata set in motion the wheel of the Dhamma, this is the third. Here the Tathagata attained final nirvana without remainder, this is the fourth. And the monk, the nun, the layman, or the laywoman who has faith should visit these places. And anyone who dies while making a pilgrimage to these shrines with a devoted heart will, at the breaking up of the body at death, be reborn in heaven. 1. The land we today call India was known to the Buddha and his contemporaries as the Rose-Apple Continent, Jambudvipa. Speaking of this land in which he was born, the Buddha said, "Few in number are pleasant parks, pleasant groves, pleasant stretches of land and lakes, while more numerous are the steep rugged places, unfordable rivers, dense thickets of scrub and thorns and inaccessible mountains." 2. But despite its dry climate and harsh environment, India, along with Egypt, China and Mesopotamia, was one of the great cradles of human civilization. It was in the central Ganges Valley in particular, or what was called the Middle Land, Majjhima Desa, that many of Indian civilization's greatest ideas and innovations sprang up. The Buddha was born in the Middle Land and spent his whole life walking its dusty roads, meditating in its dry forests and teaching in its cities, towns, and villages. He considered it a distinct advantage to be born in the Middle Land, and it probably was at that time. 3. The Middle Land nurtured Buddhism during its first crucial centuries, and although the Dhamma soon spread all over India and eventually beyond its borders to distant parts of Asia, Buddhists have always looked to this land as the home of their religion. The extent of the Middle Land is very precisely defined in the ancient Buddhist scriptures. In the Vinaya we are told that it extended in the east to the town of Kajangada, in the southeast to the Salalavati River, in the southwest to the town of 2 Middle Land Middle Way. Satakanika, in the west to the Brahman village of Thuna, and its northern borders were marked by the Usaradaja Mountains. 4. Most of these landmarks cannot be identified today, but the Middle Land of the ancient Buddhists corresponds roughly to the modern Indian states of Bihar and Uttar Pradesh and the Tarai of Nepal. Politically, the India the Buddha knew was divided into 16 countries, Mahajanapada, most of which he lived in or traveled through during his long and successful career. The most important of these countries was Magadha, which was ruled by King Bimbisara and later, during the last years of the Buddha's life, by his son Ajatasattu. Some years after the Buddha's final nirvana, the capital of Magadha was moved from Rajagaha to Patna and the country embarked on a policy of expansion. By the 3rd century BCE, Magadha had conquered almost all of India, Pakistan and Afghanistan. To the east of Magadha was Anga, a small state on the banks of the Ganges that was annexed to Magadha during King Bimbisara reign. The capital of Anga was Kampa. Magadha's main rival to the northwest was Kosala with its capital at Savatthi, and during the Buddha's life both countries went to war with each other several times. The Buddha spent most of the last 20 years of his life in Kosala and the king, Pasenadi, was one of his most devoted disciples. To the north of Magadha was Vaji, a confederacy of several clans, the most important of which were the Lichavis and the Videhas. By the Buddha's time the Lichavis had become the dominant clan and their chief city, Visali, had become the de facto capital of the confederacy. In the last year of the Buddha's life the king of Magadha was already making plans to invade Vaji. 5. Wedged between Kosala and Vaji was the Sakyan country, the Buddha's homeland. Although nominally independent, the Sakyans were under the influence of their larger and more powerful neighbor to the west, and we read in the Tipitaka that the Sakyans are vassals of the king of Kosala. They offer him humble service and salutation, do his bidding and pay him honor. 6. Just before the Buddha's final nirvana the Sakyan country was conquered by Kosala after a swift and bloody campaign. Occasionally, the Buddha would visit Kasi, which once held sway over much of the Middle Land but by his time had become politically insignificant. However, despite its waning political fortunes, Varanasi, the capital of Kasi, remained and continues to be even today an important center of religion, culture and trade. Before the Buddha renounced the world he used only perfume and silk brocade that came from Varanasi, two products that the city is still famous for. 7. Further west of Kasi into the south of Kosala was Vamsa, which was ruled by King Udina during much of the Buddha's lifetime. The capital Kosumbi was on the Yamuna and was visited by the Buddha on several occasions. Being as it is the sacred land of Buddhism, the Middle Land has inspired pilgrims throughout the centuries to overcome enormous obstacles and to risk their lives to see the places associated with the Buddha. They have come from all the regions of India, from China, Korea, Sumatra, Burma, and Sri Lanka. We know of at least one pilgrim who came all the way from what is now Kazakhstan and the former Soviet Union, which was then a predominantly Buddhist region. Pilgrims who came from China or Korea had to cross the fearful Taklamakan Desert and then climb over some of the highest mountain ranges in the world. Alternatively, they could come by ship, spending months at sea risking storms, pirates and sickness. Pilgrims coming from Sri Lanka, Sumatra or Java would have to take a ship into the Bay of Bengal to the port of Tamralipti, now Tamluk near Kadgupur in West Bengal, proceed up the Ganges as far as Patna and from there continue on foot. For those coming from Nepal and Tibet, it was not distance but climate that was the greatest obstacle. Descending from the cool clean air of their mountain homelands to the hot dusty atmosphere of the Middle Land often meant sickness or even death for these travelers. According to Shizbayakuankayab, the first Tibetan to go to India was a Karamatisala who was sent by King Srongtsanskampa to get a statue of Avalokitesvara. On the way back he stopped in Bodh Gaya to collect leaves from the Bodhi tree and sand from the Naranjara river. There is only one record of a pilgrim coming from Thailand to the Middle Land in ancient times. The monk, whose name is not known, went by foot through Phang and Lumpun in northern Thailand into Burma and from there to India. 8. The famous Kalyani inscription mention a Burmese monk of the 13th century who was able to take advantage of the powers he had developed in meditation to make regular visits to Bodh Gaya. Being thus endowed, he would, every morning, proceed to Magadha and sweep the courtyard of the Bodhi free in Yeruvala, return to Pagu in Lower Burma, and go on his alms round. One morning, while he was sweeping the courtyard of the Bodhi tree, certain traders who lived in Yeruvala and were on their way to Magadha from Pagu, saw him, and, on their return, related what they had seen to the people of Pagu. However, most pilgrims coming from Burma came over the impasse to Arakan and then either went by foot along the coast up into Bengal, or took a boat through the steamy pirate-infested waterways of the Sundarbans and then sailed up the Ganges. Of the many who set out, a large number never returned, and some never even managed to get to the Middle Land. The Chinese monk Chang Min was one such pilgrim. His aim was to reach mid-India. Accordingly, he boarded a cargo ship carrying heavy merchandise. The ship left the shore but could not make headway due to a sudden typhoon that lashed the region and made the sea very rough and turbulent. Within an hour, the ship began to sink, and in great confusion and panic the sailors and merchants on the ship began scrambling for accommodation on the smaller accompanying boat. The captain of the ship was a follower of the Buddha, and when he had got into the smaller boat he called to the monk Chang Min to join him there. But the monk replied, "Take someone else in my place. I will not go." For the sake of others, he did not join them. Chang Min calmly sat chanting as the ship sank. Some pilgrims made it to their destination but never lived to see their homelands again. In the second half of the 15th century a Sri Lankan monk named Dharmadevakara went on a pilgrimage to Bodh Gaya and then decided to travel to Nepal, Tibet, and China. He survived this long grueling journey only to die in India while on his way home. Even if they managed to reach the Middle Land, pilgrims still faced the considerable hardships that the unhealthy climate, the not infrequent political strife, and the long deserted roads offered. We read of a Korean pilgrim named Suan Ko who made it all the way to Bodh Gaya only to succumb to sickness a few days after his arrival. Another pilgrim, the Chinese monk Singh, had an encounter with robbers and barely escaped to tell the tale. Even while his life was threatened, this pious monk's only concern was that he might not be able to complete his pilgrimage. I thought at that time, indeed, that my last farewell to the world was at hand and that I would not be able to fulfill my wish to visit the holy places. A few intrepid individuals actually managed to make 2 or even 3 journeys to the Middle Land. The Chinese monk Huiyanqi first went to India in 628 CE through far western China and Afghanistan, staying at Bodh Gaya and Nalanda for 4 and 3 years respectively, eventually returning through Tibet. 18 years later he went again, but when he tried to return home political strife in Tibet and also in northwest India made travel impossible, so he decided to spend the rest of his days in the land that was far from his home but close to his heart. It is known from a 10th century inscription found at Ramkale in Sri Lanka that a monk named Mahanama managed to make 3 journeys to Bodh Gaya. During his last visit he arranged for the construction of a temple with a Buddha statue in it. For those who successfully completed a pilgrimage and returned home safely did so with their faith stronger than ever, and the knowledge that they had walked where the Buddha had walked gave them a joy that remained with them all their lives. Few pilgrims who went to the Middle Land left accounts of their journeys, but the records that survived are testimony to the triumph of faith and devotion over physical obstacles. To set out on a pilgrimage required patience, courage, faith, and a cheerful disregard for hardships, and those who returned home found these qualities strengthened. It is probably for this reason that the Buddha urged his followers to visit Lumbini, Bodh Gaya, Sarnath, and Kusinara at least once in their life. For several centuries these places were the main centers of pilgrimage. But as Buddhism began to flourish and is going on pilgrimage became increasingly popular, more places associated with the Buddha's life began to be visited. The Asokavadana, composed sometime in the 2nd century CE, names 32 such places. According to the Samantapasadaka, there were 3 pilgrims circuits in India: Mahamandala, the Greater Circuit; Majjhima Mandala, the medium-length circuit; and Antama Mandala, the smaller or last circuit. A pilgrim should, it says, set out on the first of these after the monks hold their Mahapavarana ceremony, the second on the full moon of Kartika, September/October, and the third on the full moon of Pusa, December/January. Although it is not mentioned in the text, it would seem likely the lengths of these circuits depended on whether the pilgrim intended visiting only the 4 main sacred places or other places as well. There were guidebooks to help pilgrims find their way or explain what to see when they arrived at their destination, although only a few of these have survived to the present. The 10th century route to India, Shi Tian Lujing, gives a bare list of all the places from Kaifeng, then the Chinese capital, to Bodh Gaya, while the extended guide to the Diamond Throne, Dorjdan Rjayaz Bshad, by Komidan Rig Pyrel Gri, 1250-1311, details all the sacred locations at Bodh Gaya. In 1202, the Japanese monk Myoshonin decided to undertake a pilgrimage to India. As part of his preparations for this daunting undertaking, he actually tried to calculate the distance involved and the time it would take if he set out from Chang'an, the Chinese capital. His calculations are to be found in Dainian Shiryo, apparently in his own handwriting. He wrote, "I am unable to contain my affection and longing for India, the land where the Buddha was born, and so I have drawn up plans for the journey thither. Oh, how I wish I were there. If I walk 7 long ri a day, I could reach India in 1130 days, arriving on the 20th day of the 2nd month of the 4th year of my travels. And if I walked 5 ri a day, I could at long last arrive on the 10th day of the 6th month of the 5th year, a total of 1600 days. Mayo was not making a complete stab in the dark. He had carefully studied the accounts of pilgrims who has preceded him and thus had at least some idea of what was involved. Nevertheless, his calculations were highly optimistic, and as it happened, he never even set out on this would-be journey. But what determination he had, and what ingenuity! After the virtual disappearance of Buddhism in India in the 13th century, the shrines and temples of the Middle Land were deserted. The jungle swallowed up some, others were converted into Hindu temples, and the very whereabouts of most of them was forgotten. This, together with the successive Muslim dynasties that ruled northern India, made pilgrimage to the Middle Land almost impossible for nearly 600 years. But starting in the last half of the 19th century, Buddhist shrines began to be rediscovered and restored, and slowly pilgrims began to return, although even at that time traveling through the Middle Land was still an adventure. In 1896, a Thai monk named Maha Chandrama visited the main sacred places and then wrote a guide to the sacred sites of the Buddhistic Holy Land for the benefit of those who might follow him. This little guidebook makes fascinating reading, and some of its details might be worth remembering when the modern pilgrim has to wait for a delayed train or is overcharged by a rickshaw driver. It took Chandrama 4 days to get from Gorakhpur to Lumbini. He had to walk the whole way. The train from Gaya to Nevada cost him 7 annas 9 ps, and the bullock cart from there to Rajagaha another 3 rupees. The fare from Balrampur, Savatthi, back to Kolkata cost him 6 rupees 2 anna and required changing trains twice. He gave no details about accommodation, probably because there was none. At the end of his little book, Chandrama expressed a sentiment commonly felt by those who have completed a pilgrimage. I share with the reader the merit I gained by worshipping those holy places. May the reader be delighted with the thought of those holy places. It is considerably easier to go on a pilgrimage to the Middle Land today than it was in the past, but the rewards are just as great. To see the lotus, that beautiful flower which the Buddha so often used as a simile in his discourses, as they bloom in the wet season pools and muddy village ponds, can be a very evocative experience. To encounter wandering ascetics begging for alms in crowded streets much as they did at the Buddha's time can be a powerful reminder of the eternal human quest for spiritual fulfillment. The author once encountered an old peasant woman bent at right angles by age, a diseased beggar by the side of the road, a funeral procession and a wandering Swami, all within a few hours, just as Prince Siddhartha had once done. Such experiences can add a new and dramatic dimension to one's understanding of the Dhamma. But more than this, to sit in meditation or to make offerings at the places where the Buddha lived and taught is to experience a definite spiritual presence which can be felt despite the bustle, the noise, and the buying and selling that characterize any place of pilgrimage. This spiritual presence can invigorate the pilgrim's faith and practice long after he or she returns home. To fully appreciate a journey to the Middle Land, the modern pilgrim needs to have some idea about the religious, historical, and archaeological background of each of the sacred places. Much of the history of these places is derived from accounts written by pilgrims who visited them in ancient times, and as we will make frequent references to some of these pilgrims, it will be useful to know something about their lives. Likewise, some knowledge of the types of monuments the pilgrim is likely to see as well as of the different eras and styles in Buddhist art will also enrich his or her understanding.